Hi, everybody. Welcome to Branch of Laurels. I'm Shaxi, and my very special guest tonight is Lanea from Atlantia.
Yes.
She is a Bardic Laurel, and I'm laughing because the captions are already off.
I love weird particle oral. Yes.
There we go.
Um,
Before we get going, I want to credit the artwork that we used in your flyer. It's by David Rowland,
yes.
also known as Morleo of
Morleo.
Morleo?
Yeah.
Okay. So thanks for letting us use that, and it was really cool.
Yeah, I love it. I feel so lucky that he was willing to draw that for me.
It's super cool. So welcome. Can you start us off with your SCA origin story, how you found the SCA and what attracted you to it?
Sure. So like a number of other people in the region I'm from, I took kind of a sideways path into the SCA. I had a good friend named Nikki, and she had an older brother, so I ended up meeting a lot of his friends. And I started high school, and I was during lunch reading The Two Towers. And one of Nikki's brother's friends came up to me and said, "Do you like that book?" And I said, "Yes, I've read it several times." And he said, "What do you do, like, on the weekends? Do you have a lot of plans?" And I said, "Not really. Why?" And he said, "We do this really fun thing in a park that's based on Tolkien, and you might like it." And Nikki said, "You're cool." I'm like, "Okay, what's going on?" And I grew up in the suburbs, and the park was not that far from my house, and I'm not very good at sitting still, so the idea of doing something in a park sounded great. And what he introduced me to was Daggerhair, which was founded in the DC area by a really cool guy named Crinan McBrood. And it's a foam weapons form that follows the kind of mythology of the Tolkien sagas, all of his stories built together. And over time, it became more historically focused, but it always veered back into Tolkien land. And it was great because it was a foam weapon form, and at least when I started, I don't know what the rules are now, but when I started, you could start fighting as a 12-year-old. So much younger, obviously, than adult SCA combat. So I did that for a while, and then some of the older guys in the group found out about Penzik. Probably already knew about it before I started, but no one was trying to take a 12-year-old to Penzik, or a 13-year-old, I guess. And so then I think I went to Penzik the first time when I was 15 or 16 with that group of folks.
Wow.
Just loved it. It's not far from where I used to spend summers as a kid. My mom's originally from Pittsburgh, and her parents had moved to Butler, Pennsylvania. So I'd been in that area a lot. And I knew there was a big weird thing that went on, but I didn't know what it was. And once I went, it was all over. Like this was going to be how I spent my summers forever. And then eventually we transitioned from fighting in Daggerhair to fighting in Markland, which is a different organization that was founded in Delaware, that has a more heavily Norse focus. Norse and Anglo-Saxon seem to be the most common historical foci there. And we did that for a while because there you could start fighting as a 16-year-old. This is a very clear trajectory. Because at the time you couldn't get, as you can now, you couldn't get parental permission to fight as an adult before you were an adult. So then once I finally turned 18, I was like, okay, now I can get authorized and I can do the thing. Yeah, and it's been such a major part of my life for most of my life now at this point that it's hard for me to imagine not being part of that. And the guy who introduced me to all of this wound up becoming, over time, Duke Ragnar Blackhammer. He's a Duke here in Atlantia and still a dear friend of mine. And often someone who just at the right moment stands behind me and pushes me into the light when I'm like, oh no, I was gonna go hide in that corner over there. What is wrong with you? So it's been quite a time.
That's awesome. Do you have other people that were sort of mentors early on for you?
Many. And I think that's one of the things that's so funny about this organization is that you end up meeting people kind of from all over the place who you will then know for a long time. There were other people in that group. So a lot of people know a friend of mine named Ursus. He's a photographer who does a lot of photography in the SCA. And he was one of the first people I met in Daguerre because he had done that as well. And he's still one of the premier photographers, certainly on the East Coast, if not in all of the SCA. And Crinan, who I mentioned, who founded Daguerre, was really, really excited to encourage female fighters and help us with gear, help us with training. One of the things that was really funny for me is most of my trainers as a young fighter were a foot taller than me, Crinan amongst them, and Ragnar. So often I would try to get advice from them and then not really be able to follow through on the suggestions they'd given me because I just needed a stool to stand on to, replicate what they were doing. But there was, still really a lot of very encouraging people. And then once we got into Markland, I met a couple of women who fought, and that was really, really exciting because it's what's great about foam weapon forms is that the cost of entry is really low. You don't need a lot of gear. But by the time we started doing Markland, it is armored, and trying to figure out how to make armor was confusing and hard and expensive. So I met a woman named Eldra who helped me, and another woman named Nina, more by just encouraging me and checking in with me if I wasn't fighting. One of the things that I don't think gets talked about a lot is that most young women are really discouraged from being violent. So there is a very visceral reaction you have when you engage in contact that you have to learn to handle or overcome. And a number of times, while I wasn't scared, I would have this visceral reaction to getting hit that I had to learn how to marshal. And they were really, really helpful about checking in with me and making sure I felt supported and stuff.
That's
And
awesome.
also, a bunch of the girls who I was friends with who, either started fighting around the same time I did or started fighting a little bit later, who we compare notes with and share gear with. It was just really interesting to find such a supportive group of people who wanted, just nerds doing nerd things, wanted people to play with. It's that simple. Everyone wants people to play with. So.
And just to set the time, this is in the 80s, right?
Yeah, I think, so I graduated high school in 1991, which is a very strange year to say out loud now. So I went to my first event probably in my first Pennsic must have been 89. It's a very different event than it used to be. But yeah, and then I, just continued. My rate of attendance at events changed a little bit, through college and graduate school and getting a real job and all that kind of stuff. But it's been a constant.
So you eventually transitioned from those groups into the SCA.
Right.
And how was it going from fighting where there were a lot of other women to fighting in the SCA in the early 90s?
It was strange. I still had a lot of support from my friends, which was great. And we kind of as a group suffered that dislocation you have when a whole bunch of people you grew up with go to different colleges and different places. So like Ragnar and my friend Balinar were across the state from me in Richmond. I was at Virginia Tech, which is in kind of the toe of the boot of Virginia. And I did have some friends there who fought in Markland, but none of my female fighter friends went to the same college I did. And the first number of practices I went to, it was hard for me to convince the local night marshal that I knew what I was doing. I wasn't authorized yet, but I'd been fighting for years at that point. And because there was no analogous heavy fighting for people in their late teens in the SCA, it just kind of didn't settle in. And they wanted me to do things like march up and down the field with, a jug of water, simulating a shield. But I never fight with a shield. I think I fought with a shield twice. And I was like, why am I practicing this skill I do not need and do not want? This is dumb. I am useless with a shield. I am good with a spear. Someone please hand me a spear. So, and there was no malice in it from anybody. It was just rarer for women to fight. And there were women in that group who were learning to fight. I was certainly not the only one, but I might have been one of the more experienced ones, certainly in my age group.
When did you start to get into, sorry,
That's
My
okay.
brain, we were talking earlier, my brain is not firing on all of its
All right.
neurons today. When did you start getting into bardic stuff?
Right at the start. I have always loved music. My mom was a big folkie, and we had lots of music around the house. For big swaths of time, we had music and not television. As in, didn't own a television for decent parts of my childhood. So I'd always been really into music and loved to sing and loved to write. I started writing poetry. I mean, terrible poetry, but poetry as a very, very young child. So that had always been really, really interesting to me. And part of the reason I was so drawn into this was because of the Once and Future King by White and a bunch of mythology I'd read and that kind of stuff. So I was at our dagger practices used to require that you wear a garb to them. So it kind of added to the mystique of the whole thing. And I was at a practice, and there's a guy who I think is now in Washington State, and I wish he would come back. He doesn't really play in the SCA anymore, named Laurels Del Penguin, and he's a very, very talented singer and musician and bard, great writer. And he heard me kind of singing, and he came up to me and said, "You're going to be a bard, kid." And he kind of put his hand on my forehead. And I was like, "I'm going to be a what? Tell me about this." So he encouraged me to learn some songs. And he wrote a song that is still one of my most popular things to ever sing. And that influence early on was a great push to focus on that. And I'm so glad it's been a part of my SCA experience for so long, because it's so neat to see all of the different traditions coming together from different parts of the SCA and from different parts of folk music from around the world.
So, what is your kind of main genre that you work in?
I certainly started as a war bard. I have a deeper voice than a lot of women do when I sing, and I have a lot of vocal power. I can be incredibly loud if I need to. So I've done a lot of singing either, well, not, I don't fight anymore, but when I fought, I would sing like during holds and resurrection battles, or I still sing a lot at the edge of the field. Um, and, a lot of bardic circles are loud, loud places to be. And so it's been nice to have that ability to project. So a lot of stuff that's based on war. I sing a lot of originals. When I write, I tend to either write things that are based on historical events or things that are based on mythology, particularly Celtic mythology and ancient Celtic historical events. And I do a fair number of translations from the original languages into English that I then edit down to be poetry. Because it's easier to perform, it's easier to memorize.
Very cool. I'm sitting here trying to think if we've ever had a war bard in our kingdom, and I'm not on the battlefield, so I may have missed something, but I don't think we do that here, and that's something really special and unique.
Yeah, Lorik did it when I was a kid, so I just thought it was common. I thought a lot of people did it. And then when I got to know people more broadly in Atlantia as I was going to, once I was an adult and going to more SCA events, I met other bards who do it as well, who have a very different style from me. I have a friend named Bryce de Byram, who's a really, really talented bard, but he tends to do much later period material than I do. But it's to the same effect. It rouses the troops. It makes people feel like they're actually, experiencing whatever time period is their little ideal. So yeah, it's fun.
Just looking at the comments. One of the ladies said she was afraid of hurting people when she fought. So I think that's a really common thing that we don't talk about. I never got over the getting hit part.
Yeah.
I noped out.
Because I'm short, almost every time I ever died in battle, it was because I got hit in the head or, like the neck. And overcoming your instinct to like jerk back and close your eyes when a weapon is coming at your face is really, really hard. And you can only overcome it so much.
Yeah.
Anybody who tells you they keep their eyes entirely open and don't react at all is a liar. Stop listening to them. Um, but you do have to, have some sense of self-preservation and not totally lose it in those moments. I never worried too much about hurting people because really I didn't have a chance to hurt very many people. I'm not tall. Um, I'm, I was good with the spear, but I was never going to be, you know,
An arm breaker.
like, I just don't have the thuggery in me because I don't have the upper body strength to do some of the real damage that some people do in the field.
Awesome. So, literature and war fighting are just kind of intertwined for you because that's where you came in.
Yes.
That's really cool. What got you interested in early Celtic history and bog bodies and such? Say it.
So I, like a lot of people in the United States, are, I'm a blend of different ethnic backgrounds. My mom's side of the family is German and Italian, and those are the people I grew up around. My biological father, who I've never really had much of a relationship with, is the British Isles mix. And that was always intriguing to me, but separate. And I heard a lot of that music growing up. And then when I was in middle school, my mom, who had been divorced since I was a very, very small child, met and started dating a man who is the child of a Scottish immigrant. And he at the time was living far away. They had a long distance relationship for a little while. And he came down for a visit and he brought the family to a Celtic festival. And I was like, what is going on? Why am I not in this situation every weekend? This is the best thing in the world. And I was just so excited because there was all this live music and, pretty jewelry and great books and great art. And just, it was very, very appealing to me. So when I started actually, doing reenactment, I had to pick a time and a place, and I just went straight to Celts. And I couldn't, at first, I was looking a little bit later because so many of the people in my group were doing like 10th century Welsh, or they were doing Norse or whatever. By and large, we've always been early period, but early period in the SCA sense, not early period in the Lanea sense, is basically the Mesolithic. So to my mind, I was like, yeah, but we know too many answers to the questions we are asking. I make it way harder on myself. So of course, I fell in love with, Iron Age Britain when Rome was causing a lot of problems there. And anyone who's done any textile research knows trying to find textile evidence in Britain is a nightmare because it just doesn't last. The way the soil is there and the temperatures, how moist it is, textiles just degrade like crazy. So trying to actually find stuff to base anything on in an anti-literate culture with ground that rots fabric is a nightmare, which I think is part of the reason I liked it. Yeah. I'm a bit of a masochist when it comes to research. I want to not have easy answers. I want to have to dig and try and figure things out
and noodle on.
Do that.
Yeah. My culture, it's also not a literate culture, but we very conveniently have a stash of frozen tombs with things perfectly frozen and preserved, and then a dry desert set of tombs.
You all have the best finds.
Yeah, it's great. So, and the research that's been coming out in the last 5 or 6 years has just been mind-boggling. It when I first started researching this 22 years ago, it was really hard. There was a National Geographic documentary on the Ice Maiden that came out that I VCR taped off of PBS. Yeah. And I watched that thing until it was worn through.
Yeah. I am sure any of my friends from my tribe are making fun of me right now because I have such a crush on steppe cultures. And every time I'm working on a new class, they're like, how is she going to work in a steppe culture? The textile finds, the jewelry finds are so amazing. And when, I'm sure you've probably seen the catalog from it, display came to the National Geographic in DC on the Scythians. And it had this amazing catalog with it, all of these beautiful gold the plaques on the clothes and the hats and all of it was so gorgeous. And I was just like, what do I gotta do to get into that? So I have made a couple of step garments, but I have not, like, I haven't gone all in. And a few years ago, I got to do my friend's coronation as a ritual drama about Sarmatians. And I was just like, oh, the slope, I'm falling down it. So I just have to figure out how to make my name work in that culture.
Well, when we're done, later we can get together and I have some ideas.
Excellent.
And I can help you out with clothing.
I have the hats. The hats are down. I have the hats.
Awesome. Hats are really important.
They are. They're vital. I do want to make the one that's basically a unicorn horn. I need that one.
Yeah.
Also,
the Ice Maiden one. It's like this big.
Yes.
It's 4 feet tall. I keep trying to think about the logistics of trying to walk.
Yeah.
And not move your head. I don't know. And the weird thing about that piece is that it's a whole wig.
Yeah.
Which, when I found that out, I was like, okay, I can't even imagine. It's like a helmet, basically.
Yeah, it
and
absolutely.
Barred, and no. So it's crazy. Anyway, sorry, we got off on a tangent there.
I love
it. So early period, not super popular or pretty popular in Atlantia?
It's certainly more popular now than it used to be. When I first started getting really, really serious about trying to make appropriate garb that would match the time period I was shooting for, I definitely got some pushback. There were a few people doing Roman, but there weren't really any barbarians that were doing anything. So someone told me I wasn't allowed to wear pants, which, go sit down. Yes, I am. I'm an adult. I'm allowed to do anything as long as I don't hurt anybody. And also, to tell a fighter they can't wear pants is just ridiculous. What? I'm not gonna put my leg armor on a skirt. It's not gonna work. So I did get a little pushback, but unfortunately, there's always someone with one of those opinions. And thankfully, I am enough of a brat. And I'm like, oh, let me go do exactly what you just told me not to do, person who's not in charge of me. Let me. Is this a thorn in your side yet? How is that? Is that good? So that didn't really ever stop me from what I was doing. What was frustrating is that I wanted to be able to turn to other people to discuss my projects with and work out how to fill the holes, the gaps in the timelines, and how much of a stretch is it to refer to a Danish find when you're doing something in Britain? Can we prove any evidence of Congress between those cultures? That's what I was wanting. And thankfully, because Pennsic is so big, I was able to start finding people in other groups that had similar focus. And then I was like, okay, I'm getting more of a community of people who really want to do this deep scholarly dive into different subjects. And that was just, it's like candy every time. It's so exciting to find someone who's interested in the same sort of stuff you are and might know a resource or someone you can talk to about it. Oh, it's the best.
It's huge. It's huge. I found a Tyus early on in my journey, and I ended up apprenticing to his wife. And we would just lay on the ground at an event off in a corner and just talk about stuff.
Yeah.
And it was the best.
Yes, absolutely.
Best. And we don't get time to do that anymore, so we should make that work. So, and looking through some of your photos online, it looks like you have this whole horde of Celtic people in plaids and face paint and stuff. What's that all about?
So I originally started in a group that's called Anglesey, and that started in the DC area. It's over 30 years old now, so it started before I was playing. And it was a really, really fun group, but it's basically a football team. Most of the people who were members of it had grown up playing football or a similar sport, and there were certainly girls in the group, but we were outnumbered. And it was great for fighting, and there were some of them who were interested in more scholarly stuff, but not necessarily all of us. And the general vibe could occasionally be a little bit too frat house and a little bit not library enough for me, just because you know, I want to sing and I want to have a great time and I want to fight then. I don't get to do that now. And then I want to go sit in the library and look at all of these books that I got. So, um, not that long after I started going to Penzic, a friend of mine from a different Celtic group. There are so many Celtic groups in the DC area, it gets very confusing. But there's one called Laurels that was founded by the same guy who founded Dagger here. And one of the members of that group came up to me during the first week of Penzic, which used to be a ghost town. I'd gone for land grab and was one of the people who was staying in the camp after like the original setup group had left. And a friend of mine from Dalradia came over and got me and said, you need to go meet these people in Prashan. And I said, what's Prashan? And he said, it's another reenactment group in the DC area. And he walked me just around the corner. It was really close to where I camped, and introduced me to this fascinating group, which had far more women than the group I started in. And a lot of them were very, very interested in fiber arts and in research and in forming intentional community, essentially, in building a real family structure rather than a sports team. And I don't have a problem with sports teams, but I was craving that. So I started going, they have private events as well as a lot of them go to SCA events. So I started going to their private events. And once I got injured and I couldn't fight anymore, I moved to Prashan full time. And that's where I camp.
Still.
Yes. Yeah. So at Penzic, that's where I camp. When we go to Gulf Wars, all of the Prashanis camp in the same camp that I go to, Early Period Life / Baskermark. That's our camp where we go at Gulf Wars. And if we're going to something, what's really interesting about Prashan is that it's not, the SCA probably views it as a household. It's really not a household, it's a tribe. And we're all over the place. We've got people in not every kingdom, but almost every kingdom. And so if I decide I want to travel somewhere, I absolutely know someone there or know someone who knows one of my best friends. And it's wonderful to have this network of people all over the country who are interested in similar stuff and, have those connections.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Someone says spite is a sustainable energy. I don't know what that means. Is that significant to you?
Well, as I mentioned before, if anyone ever tells me I'm not allowed to do a thing, I'm twice as likely to do it.
There you go.
And I am not unique in that. A number of my friends are similarly driven. Who says I can't? Why can't I?
I think that as well.
Yeah. And it's a good way to be. And frankly, for women, we kind of have to, because lots of people are constantly trying to tell women what we are and we're not allowed to do. And we shouldn't listen to those people.
True facts. Somebody wants to know how that group name is spelled. Is it Preshawn?
No, it's a little different from that. It's Preachain.
Okay.
Which is an accidental mispronunciation of the Irish word for, it's a really interesting word. I'm a linguist. This is important to me. So Prashan is largely used for crows. It's an onomatopoeic word. It's actually pronounced Prakan. But when the group picked the name, they didn't know that yet. Irish is really hard. But what's great about that word is it also covers ravens and hawks and eagles. It's for big birds that are really smart but like meat. That's what that word means. Because taxonomy, of course, as we use it today, is very modern.
Right. Oh, that's really cool. Wow. I've seen that word quite a bit, and I do not read it the way that it sounds. I will have to change that.
That happens so often. It's always a sign that someone has learned something from reading, which, how else are you going to learn?
Yeah, it's been really interesting watching my kids start to use some of these words, and I'm like, that word is different than what you think it is. It's really sweet, but that's exactly what it is. It's we don't use a lot of words in our everyday language that
Yep.
are in literature. So
Yep.
it's an interesting thing. Um, let's see. Do you want to look at some pictures?
Sure.
Okay. Pull those up.
Oh, so that's a blast from the past. That's me with all the hair and the big spear at a Daguerre battle at a site called Linganore Plantation that I don't think gets used anymore. I was definitely in high school.
Wow.
Yeah, those patchwork pants were a labor of love, and I had to fix them so often. They're incredibly silly, but I loved them.
Awesome. So you ended up, you made all of your own garb?
Yeah, well, and it was really funny because since we wore garb to practice, my second or third practice, I'd made an outfit, and it was a terrible outfit made of garbage, but I made it, and I put a little bit of embroidery on it. I learned to embroider as a little kid. Um, and when I showed up, so many of the guys were so excited, like, wait a minute, where did you get clothes? And I told them I made clothes, and every single one of them was like, oh my gosh, if I get you fabric, can you make me some pants? Oh my God, make me a tunic, make me a tunic. It was great, because then suddenly I had enough money to chip in for gas, because, they would pay me something, and I would make them something, and everyone was happy. It was great.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I skipped that part of asking for payment for clothes. I never got that down.
Yeah, it was the only way. I couldn't afford to buy thread if they didn't give me stuff. So this picture is hilarious. So this is from Pennsic. I don't know offhand what Pennsic it is, but I'm guessing, I think this is 91. And I say that because I'm not in armor. I didn't turn 18 in time to fight at this Pennsic. I mentioned earlier my friend Ragnar Blackhammer, his grace. He's the one whose shoulder my foot is on. And he has a plastic bowl on his head. And yes, that's Ragnar. I don't know why he has a plastic bowl on his head, but he does.
Awesome.
Yeah.
This is such a great picture because there's so many just expressions on different people's faces.
And that group it was just full of so many engines of very good spirited chaos. There were constant pranks in camp. And good spirited, but it was just never ending. And it was funny because I remember at the time thinking, there's people in the SCA just don't like us because we're young. And then in retrospect, we were obnoxious. We were obnoxious. Oh my gosh, we must have been a nightmare to camp near.
And this is the football team-ish?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
As you can tell, this is a football team with a couple of girls in it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so this is much, much more recent. This is under our battle fly at Pennsic, maybe 2017? I can't tell off the top of my head. And I know I am performing a piece I do on Boudica.
Very cool.
Which I frequently do before the field battle. And this is the same day we do Women in White, which I think I probably gave you a picture of that, which is a thing we've done at Pennsic for years and years and years, that when we get to actual photos of it, I can explain.
I'm looking forward to hearing about that because I've seen that like in the later 90s.
Yeah. So this is a picture of some of my favorite people. I mentioned that Brashan kind of reaches all over the place. Not long after it was founded, people from Meridies joined, and the woman facing the camera is my friend Kalea, who's a countess, and a Laurel for shoemaking from Meridies. She reigned with Aelenon. And the guy with the hat and the sunglasses is our friend Sir Draculin, and he was my partner's knight. And he and Kalea are married, and they're just two of our dearest friends in the SCA. And she's a lawyer. He is a historian with a seriously heavy historical academic chops. And they're some of the people I would run to when I had to talk about something really weird that no one else wanted to talk about. And I still do on a regular basis. I'm like, Lord, we need to start teaching research methods in the SEA, and these two will be right there with me.
Awesome.
Yeah. This is long ago and far away. This is 1993, and I know from the haircut. And the knight in that picture is our friend Duke Haworth, who actually just moved back to Atlantia. He was our wanderer. He started in Daggahir, like a lot of those people from that group, and he went to Guam to teach English. And while he was there, he was flying around, going to events in the far west, as people do there. And he won a tournament. And I wish he was here to actually tell the story. The Queen of the West was there, and she said, well, who is this guy who won this tournament? He's not wearing a knight's belt. Who's this guy? And she knighted him. And he'd never been a squire. And I don't know if anyone's still allowed to do that now. But, it was the 90s. Things were different.
Right.
And he came home from Guam, Sir Halfwork. And we were like, what? How did that happen, man? That's crazy. And then he went on to win crown tournaments in several different kingdoms. And now he's back here in the DC area, having lived in Drachenwald and Glenavon and Antir.
Yep.
Yeah, super fun guy. So that is the night before I got laureled. We're at Gulf Wars. And I am a brat, as I've mentioned many, many times. And because I have this really deep focus on mythology and myth history from Celtic culture, we have stories about how poets are recognized by kings. And the concept of a vigil would never have occurred in pre-Christian Ireland because it doesn't make any sense outside of the bounds of Christianity. And I'm not a Christian, so I also am not comfortable borrowing the ceremonies and mores of cultures that aren't mine. I don't want to pretend to someone else's faith. It seems very rude to me. So thankfully, I was given a writ to contemplate joining the Laurel so I could make some arrangements. And one of the things I said was, I would love to have a bardic the night beforehand, but I can't do a traditional vigil. And instead, what they did was make me stand still and listen to people say nice things about me. And it was terrible. And I wept and wept and wept, and they're monsters. And I am wearing, everybody's favorite accessory, a handmade feather cloak, which I made for myself. I came up with the idea and I was like, oh, I can never make anyone else make this. It's too terrible. It's so much work. And it's awesome. I love wearing it. I don't get to wear it very often because it's so ostentatious, but if anyone needs an excuse to wear a feather cloak, a number of different cultures use them. And I've done the research, so,
It's just beautiful.
I love it. It's so obnoxious.
Did you wear it for your actual ceremony too?
Yeah. So I walked to the field with it on. I did a field elevation. And when it was time for me to put on the stuff of a laurel, I took it off and I gave it to my friend Seth to hold. He's a Duke from Ridiers, and he's a foot taller than me too. Everybody is at least a foot taller than me, except for Ailenon, who I'm facing in this picture, who is like a foot and a half taller than me. And then I put on the laurel cloak, which a wonderful friend of mine, Laurel Fay, she's a bardic laurel, and she and I were kingdom bards together when I got my writ, and she received her laurel really close after I got mine. So yeah, I got to strut around in that ridiculousness. It was great.
And Elenon and Mineko were the ones that suggested that I interview you. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank both of them.
Yeah.
For hooking us up.
Mineko's great. Ailenon's okay. He can stay around.
He said very nice things about you, and I imagine that that's what he's doing in this photo as well.
Yes, that's exactly what he was doing. It was very cruel. He also made me cry. You can see we're facing a long hall. One of the things I love so much about Gulf Wars is this hall. The man standing in the door of it, a dear friend of mine, Baron Brian Kildonan, who everybody calls Mad Dog. That's his hall. And group of my friends built it together and have maintained it over the years. And it's absolutely the most magical space I've ever performed in. If that hall didn't exist, I would not have a Laurel. I'm 100% sure of it.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fantastic thing. You can see the little signature in the corner of this photograph. My friend Baroness Sin, she's the landed Baroness just north of where I live. I'm in a shire and she's in Highland Ford, and she photographed everything for us, which was amazing because we didn't want to have random constant photography, and
Right.
so handled it with a team. It was amazing.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And do people sleep in this hall, or is it just more kind of a party space?
It's a social space. People do sleep in it occasionally, but the rule is if you get to site late at night and you don't have time to put up your tent, you can sleep in there one night. But if dog lets sleep, people sleep in there all the time. We would never be able to use it for its actual function.
Right.
So we definitely have just social time and bardics in there. We have classes in there because this is at the dividing point in our camp where facing the way we are now, everything to the left is living history space and class space, and then everything to the right is where people's tents are. So we host classes in there. When Gulf NATO happened, we used it as a disaster shelter.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really really wonderful to have. And Gulf gets real weather, so having a big building where we can congregate is wonderful.
Yeah, for sure. Well, in Ontario, we have learned to make our tents weatherproof, but I think that that's not the case in most kingdoms.
Yeah, I've found from camping with people from different parts of the country that have such different weather than we have. Atlantia, we have to worry about rain and mud, and occasionally a hurricane, especially if you're down on the southern coast of Atlantia.
I shouldn't laugh, but it's just so wow.
Yeah, and but we hang out with a lot of people from Callantyre, and when I get to Gulf Wars, there's one friend in particular who's our triple peer from Callantyre, our friend Sir Richard. I make him look at my tent and tell me what I've done wrong, because the weather at Gulf Wars is so different and much more Kansan sometimes than any of us would like. So I make people who really understand high winds take a look at my setup just in case.
Just to make sure that it's going to stay put.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. It's really cool.
Yeah. So this is a very old project of mine. I mentioned earlier that I do embroidery. I've done it forever. There's a tiny little household in Atlantia called the Gaggle, and I made that based on illuminations from the Book of Kells. So it's a banner that's all embroidered, and that's my little signature down the side in Ollam. And I entered it back when I was allowed to enter, I entered it in Prashant's early period ANS competition, and I won, which was super exciting. And then, of course, I gave the banner away because that's how that goes. But yeah, that's a super old photograph. I never had a picture of that banner because I made it and I gave it away so fast I didn't get a photograph because cell phones weren't around.
Is it all stem stitch?
Yeah, it's all stem stitch with a little bit of outline. And I've done a lot of research into the history of embroidery, and stem stitch is like everybody's ride or die stitch. It's so stable and it wears really, really well, and it's so common
Yeah.
in medieval embroidery.
It's really beautiful. That's a lot of work.
Yeah, it was a lot. So this is a photograph of my partner's back, and that coat, which is kind of like a hanger rock but made a little bit differently, is one of the many ridiculous things I have made him that he is slowly ruining by fighting in it, which was the plan all along.
Right.
But he's wearing a Volsgard 6 helmet that our friend Richard from Callantyre made. And previously he wore like a Roman cavalry helm, so I wore early period stuff to go with it. And when I mentioned to my friend Ursus that I was going to make a new black and red coat for Alarin, Ursus said, well, you have to put some pattern in it because the lens flare will be terrible, because he views everything as a photographer would. So I did this and was roundly cursed by a number of people because now other people are like, well, Lanea did it for Alarin.
So tell me what the significance behind the red and black checky is.
That's what we use for Prashan. That's kind of just our symbol, red and black check, and it has been since before I joined the group. I don't know who came up with that. I would love to know. But our fighters wear red and black checks on the field, normally just hanging from their belt. So it's really, really confusing to people who are trying to find us. Like it does not work well as like a, identify this unit on the field thing.
Right.
Everyone in Prashan knows what everybody in Prashan looks like, but other people won't necessarily understand. And then that sort of flaming crow design, our friend Bron Midwinter, who's an amazing artist who lives in southern Atlantia and is a member of Dalradia, one of our sister tribes, drew that design for a shield of Laurels. So I copied it onto both a belt favor and onto the back of this coat. And then the Bridget's cross is in there to symbolize me.
It's just beautiful.
Thanks. Yeah.
We do, our kingdom arms is a background of white and yellow, gold and silver checky. And so I make a lot of checky too.
Yeah. That is a repair. So that coat has taken a beating. Alarion has actually changed some things about his armor so that there are fewer opportunities for the armor itself to harm that fabric. But one of the things I found when I was researching embroidery is that as far as we can tell, it developed as a repair technique. So it is how I repair garments. And that was the first repair to that garment, but it has had many, many others. And it's now a thing that we joke about. Like people, I'm going to go tear this, and then Lanea will fix it by embroidering on it. And that's probably 2 inches wide. It's not very big.
Right. That's really cool. Okay, so I think that's the last picture.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no, there's one more.
Oh. So that, I make these belts. I made the first one years ago. I was at Penzic, and a bunch of us had been weaving. And my friend Richard, who was the first knight I was really friends with, and was also one of 2 people who worked very hard to make sure that I felt comfortable and well armored on the field, asked if I would make him a belt. And I would, I had a basket of colorful yarn. And I said, sure, what color do you want? Come pick stuff out. And he said, I want white. And I said, what other color do you want? And he said, just white. And I thought, dag nabbit, it's going to be terrible. How am I going to get a pattern to show up? So I went home and I played a lot with a huge variety of different wool yarns in shades of white. And I made him a belt. And the first one was about 3.5 inches wide and, plenty generous enough for a double knot. And I gave it to him, and he gave me, because we have this gift culture and it is a dangerous thing, he gave me a reproduction of the Altoona helm. That's basically a parade helm. It's not SCA legal. So that we made each other cry in public. That's, a very common thread here. And then the next year at Penzic, my friend Drax said, hey, Lanea, will you do me a favor? And because he's one of my favorite people on the planet, I said, I'll do anything for you, Drac. And he laughed and he said, you're so dumb. Make me a belt like Richard's, but better. And I was like, oh no, what have I done? So I made one for Drac. And at the time I had a simpler, less stable loom, and it really hurt my hands. I have trouble with arthritis in my hands and have for a long time. So I gave it to him and he said, I won't tell anyone you made it. And I said, no, tell everyone I made it, that I lost all of my fingers in a tragic weaving accident. So that's what he told people. And I mean, my hands are fine. I did not lose my fingers in a tragic weaving accident, but that then became a long-standing joke. I've since made a couple dozen of them, and a number of friends have commented that if they see one of my belts on someone, they know that person is safe, which I think is a great compliment, because that means they trust my judgment about people, but also that they trust people I'm telling them I find trustworthy.
Yeah.
So
that's huge, actually.
Yeah. And so far I've only gotten to make one for a woman, because I don't make them for strangers. I make them for very close friends. So I can't wait to be able to make more of them for women.
What technique is this?
It's a warp face band, so inkle essentially. Though that term is much more modern.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And yes. So that is the last one. So I'll stop
I
sharing.
give you more pictures. Sorry.
No, that's okay. That was super cool. So you mentioned that you would like to see, or like to have the opportunity to make more belts for women.
Yeah.
And the white belt is specific to knights in the SCA.
Yes. Yes, it is.
And you are in a kingdom that has no female knights.
I am, and it's hard. It's hard on the women who fight here because it's as if there is now a laser focus on them to get it done. And anyone who's ever been on a path to peerage knows that that pressure is generally not helpful. And it's hard on the knights who are working very hard to try and foster positive situations for women on the field. Obviously, heavy fighting is on hold until it's safe for us to go to events again. Um, but it's a difficult situation, and I think there are a lot of people who really want to make fighting better for women in general all over the SCA. I think I can attest that Atlantia has gotten a lot better, but it's not perfect here. It's not perfect in any kingdom. There are still some problems that we need to deal with.
For sure.
Yeah.
Um,
What I've seen and what I hope will continue is that people are respecting the women who are saying, we're working on it, please don't focus so hard on us right now, which I think is a fair thing to ask, because you can't point at someone and say, go get knighted and have them magically comply. It doesn't work that way.
it doesn't work that way. And then when that person does get knighted, my sister was the fourth female knight in Ontier, and the other three had mostly stopped playing. So there wasn't there was no representation for her coming up, really. I mean, there was kind of the myth that these three ladies had been knighted, but they weren't around as much. And then when she got knighted, she became the representation.
Yeah.
She became the person, and it's such a huge amount of pressure.
It is. It's a lot of weight.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, people had told me before I was in a polling order that everything looks simpler from the outside than it is inside of them. And the first polling order I was brought into is the Order of the Pearl, which is the second, I think it's the second largest polling order in Atlantia. It's huge. Atlantia is not geographically that big. We're only, part of the Eastern Seaboard, but our population density is no joke. We have a lot of people who are active. And as you know, you can be in the arts community and be active without being at every single event, because so much of what we do at home. And getting stuff done in polling orders takes time. Even when someone is the best candidate in the world, it takes time. And even if you get the whole order on the same page, which is harder in larger orders with more diverse things, then you also need the right crown to then move the business forward. And I had heard that, but until I was actually engaged in that process, I didn't really know. You can't know until you're there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it works differently in every kingdom. For us, we are so geographically spread out that for the Pelicans and Laurels, we have regional councils that discuss. We have two principalities. So we have a Tier principality and a Summit Principality Council. And then we have Rivers, which is like Northern Oregon and Southern Washington. And then we have Central, which is kind of the Seattle area. And then we have Inlands, which is east. And then we have Pacifica, which is the peninsula area around Seattle. Because geographically they couldn't get. And so we foster and develop candidates in each of our regions, and we go through different stages. And then once we get to the point where we want to take them to kingdom, we actually make like a PowerPoint and a presentation, and we sell the candidate to the kingdom and to the crown. And it's kind of a crazy system. It involves a lot of paperwork. It involves a lot of tracking. But I think we're missing, fewer people are falling through the cracks than used to.
Yeah.
So I think it's been a good system for us.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely, I don't envy people who are doing the math in their heads for when they're going to get a given award and trying to figure out what they're missing or why they're not winding up on people's radars or whatever. That has not really been part of my experience in the SCA. So it's hard. And I've tried to talk to a number of people to get them to reduce their focus on awards. Not because it's wrong to want awards, but just because you can't control the end process. You can control how much you attempt to dedicate to your work in terms of how much research you do and how much time you spend on your art or on your service. And you can try to promote your work by entering competitions or going to events or volunteering, all of those things. But you can never, ever, ever take charge of how people react to you. So
you can't, and you also can't control, even if you're getting out there and being seen, sometimes you don't get seen.
yeah,
And it's not, like sometimes there's someone in our area that's been doing incredible work, and all of a sudden we're like, why are they not on our list?
yeah,
They should have been on our list like 6 years ago, but they're not on our list.
Yep.
You know, every once in a while something like that happens, and it's not a perfect system. There is no hoops to jump through. It's super random,
yeah,
and that's
yeah. And
really frustrating.
it is, and I wish there was a way to make it less difficult, and I don't know off the top of my head. Um, I'm relatively new to the Laurel, and a big chunk of my time as a Laurel has been during COVID. So we have a lot of online interaction in Atlantia, and beyond, but um, I'm very interested to see how things change moving forward. Our Crown has definitely been giving out awards, and we've had a number of order members made in the Laurel and in other orders as well. But yeah, it's a weird time, and it's a weird hobby, and it's full of weird people. So we don't always handle things in the best way, and often it's because we don't know what the best way is.
Yeah, and your path has been, uniquely, uh, I want to say delayed. I pulled up for all of these interviews. I pull up, order of precedence to just kind of help follow your career. And if I was just looking at your order of precedence, your first award is in 2014. That's 6 years ago.
Yep.
So I would have guessed you've been maybe playing for 7 or 8 years. And
yeah, yeah. My path was really strange. So, I started playing outside of the SCA, and the DC area in particular has a lot of non-SCA reenactment and LARP groups. And I think the SCA understands it better now, but there was certainly a time where people would come in from those groups, and the local SCA groups were like, "What? Where did you come from? You're not making any sense. What are you talking about?" I think that's one of the places where online communication has actually helped. A lot of people denigrate online communication, but I think community building, if people are not being jerks, can happen really, really well online. And I think that smooths a lot of that stuff out. And then I went to college and I played a fair amount with the group there in the barony I lived in, and made some dear friends who I still know and had a great time. But I was in college and I was broke and I didn't have a car for a decent amount of that time, so that limited how many events I could go to. And I was still somewhat active in Markland more than Daggett at that point. And then I went to grad school, and I, went to as many events as I could, but my graduate program was insane. There was one semester where I was reading 2,000 pages a week every week. So I just only had so much time. And of course I was broke because I was a student. And then when I came back and I got a real job, and I got married to a friend who I'd, grown up doing this kind of stuff with and gone to the same college as, and he was less interested in kind of the social aspects of SEA stuff. So we would go to some events, but we're more likely to day trip. And it got to a point where it suddenly dawned on me that I wasn't participating in the level that I wanted to. And on some level, I felt like I was accidentally being misrepresented because a number of people decided that because I have this weird Celtic studies academic background and I do the kind of translating I do, that I just automatically deserved a laurel. And I did not deserve laurel. What I was doing, I wasn't doing for the SCA. I was doing for me, and it's not wrong to do that kind of stuff for yourself. But you cannot expect people to know who you are if you never go up to them and introduce yourself. So I would teach, but I wouldn't teach in Atlantia. I would teach in Meridies. I would teach at Gulf Wars. I would teach at Penzic in our, I think it was one of the members of Brashan started this great early period ANS day. And we have it every year at Penzic. We have classes and we have demonstrations and all kinds of great stuff. I'm pretty sure Anuv started that. And I found that before I moved in with Brashan, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the perfect place for me to teach because these people have like the right beginning information that I can start off with. And I don't have to walk all the way up to the hill, where the main classes happen, because that's a really long walk from where camp is. And I did that for years. So people who knew me from Gulf Wars or from Penzic were like, why are you not getting more traction in Atlantia? Well, because I'm not doing anything in Atlantia. I'm going to events. I'm hanging out in the shadows. I'm not going to court. I'm doing invisible service. And I wasn't pressed because I knew that I wasn't doing the thing. And around 2000, I had written a translation of one of my favorite pieces of Irish mythology, one of the introductory pieces to the Toynbee Cúlainneo, which is basically as commonly done in ancient Ireland as the Iliad would be done in ancient Greece. It's a really important piece. And I was at Penzic and I performed it when a friend asked me to. And a very nice man came and sat with me. And he was from Eldamere and he was a Bardic Laurel. And he said, where do you live? And I told him. And he said, what awards do you have? And I said, I don't have any awards. And he said, are you apprenticed? And I said, no. He said, do you want to apprentice to me? And I said, you're really nice. You live in Canada. I'm like, how's that going to work? Because Facebook didn't exist. None of that stuff was around. But it kind of jerked me up and made me think, if I ever want to do that thing, which maybe I should, because I have secreted away all of this amazing information that maybe I should share with people, then I'm going to have to make the leap to become a more public person. So eventually I did. The real push, the real reason you see that jump in 2014 is my husband and I parted on positive terms. We decided to get divorced. And I started dating an old friend of mine who, it's sad that not all of my photographs came across because there were some funny ones that are missing from the file. I started dating an old friend of mine, and he was squired to a knight in Meridies, which again, those cross-kingdom apprenticeships are tough. And he said, I want to do it. I want to get knighted. And I was like, okay, well, what do we have to do for you to have this dream come true? And he said, we have to go to a lot of events. And I was like, let's go to a lot of events. And we just started this wild tour. And it was great because my house was on the market. So I needed to not be there so that people could come and look at it. And we went to events all over the place. And because I was there and paying more attention on the field than I had since I had quit fighting, I was meeting people and talking to people. And a number of them were like, who are you? Where are you from? Where did you come from? And I was like, oh, I've been here the whole time. I've just been over there in the woods, hiding. So it's amazing the effect that actually telling people the things you've learned has on your path, as opposed to just putting it in a little notebook.
I think it's one of the places where the order falls short. And really, I can only speak to my kingdom, but several of the Laurels that I know that it's taken 20+ plus years to get recognized are just very private, shy people. And it isn't until an extrovert kind of imposes themselves on them
Right.
and starts, um, you know, pulling them out of their shell and getting them out there that things start to happen for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
For me, there was no lack of extroversion. I'm
right,
obnoxiously extroverted. It was more, I needed to put in the time to deal with some just logistical stuff to make it easier. Um, like I sunburn really quickly. And so the battlefield can be dangerous for me. So I have to have a plan in place. And thankfully, my partner is really supportive of that. So he will remind me as I'm walking out of the tent, pick up your hat. I'm like, oh yeah, I need a hat. I can't go out there without a hat. Um, and I found that a number of people were just, they were far more fascinated with me than I deserved. Um, just, people want a new voice. They want people to come and teach so that their tired teachers who've been teaching too much can get a break. And they want people to volunteer to help organize stuff. Everybody needs a break sometimes. And everybody needs that spark of someone who feels new to them, even if they're not actually new, just, someone you haven't talked to every 2 days for 25 years is a breath of fresh air, even if they happen to be terrible the way I am, because I'm terrible. Um, but yeah, I found open arms everywhere I turned. Um, and a number of people uh, were just, excuse me, so effusive about having someone who was willing to, like, I'm not, something about the way I was raised or something. Um, I don't like to take credit for things. Not that I'm not taking credit for my own writing, but I see everything as a team venture. So I think I'm less likely to be tapping my foot demanding a something. And I think I'm more likely to just go pick up a broom and start sweeping when the
right.
sweeping needs to be done. And I think a lot of that was also trained into me by Prashant, because that's the way we organize things as a camp. When you have a 60-person camp in a muddy field, you need to have teamwork to make sure that, people's camps aren't getting flooded and that kind of stuff.
Everybody's got to be on task.
Yeah, yeah, and be willing to do their share of work. Um, so, yeah.
Interesting. Um, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to talk about?
So we touched on women in white, and I should probably explain that more,
Oh
because
yeah.
for people on the East Coast, that's probably the most visible thing about my tribe that they would recognize. So this, I know, was a Nuve. One of the members of Prashan, I think one of the founding members, she certainly predates me in the organization, had been reading a book and came across a description of a bunch of Celtic women escorting men to a battle. And she was really taken with the description and pointed out at the start that it was possible that the scholarly provenance was not great. But whether the provenance was good or not, we should totally do this thing. And at the time, I was still a fighter and still camping around the corner. So I kind of watched, very intrigued, as they came up with this beautiful thing where the fighters get their kits together, and the non-fighters dress in white and put on woad and copper belts, and they carry weapons, and everybody processes up to the field singing, and then the fighters get in a clump, and the women in white, and it's not only women, there are children, there are non-binary people, there are men who want to participate in it. We don't limit any of that. The name is just 30 years old or whatever. The dancers will gather around the fighters, and there's a very specific dance and chant that happens. And it's basically a recreation as close as we can get to an Iron Age um, uh, ritual to empower warriors with the spirit of the entire tribe. And I got to, as a fighter, be inside the circle a couple of times, and it's mind blowing. And then when I couldn't fight anymore, I moved to the outside, which a few people have gotten to do, but not many people have been in both positions. Most people are either one of the women in white or they're one of the fighters. And it's It's a really striking thing to see. And what has been really great for us over the years is it's really community building for Bashan, which is wonderful. People feel very included when they get to take part in it, and photographers love it.
Yeah.
It's just it's a fun thing that we do, and I love that little reminder of the ancient world in what is often an event that's full of 14th and 15th century um, sci-fi to me. It's so it's so far along the timeline from where I rest. Um, yeah, I really love it.
It's really cool. I've been to Pensick twice, and I have pictures of that from both times that I went. And
Yeah,
I have never known the story behind it. I just thought it was really cool.
yeah, yeah. And we've now on rare occasions we've done it at other times. So one of the events that made me really come out of my shell in the SCA and do more public stuff rather than just I sang around Bardics all the time. I just didn't do stuff during the day. That was really why I was largely unnoticed because people had gone to sleep like rational adults. But my friend Kalea, who I mentioned earlier, was given a writ to join the Laurel, and she's a shoemaker. And she reached out to me and she said, "Would you write a ceremony for my elevation?" And I said, "You do know I've never been to an elevation because I was, not going courts at the time." And she said, "Yeah, that's why I want you to do it because you'll make it different." So I built her this elevation script, which in retrospect was obnoxious. And I can't believe anybody let me do this because I scripted speeches for all of the worthies, for all of the peers that would speak on her behalf. And of course, they were not required to use them. But I came from the point of view of Welsh mythology because there is a very important mythological character slash god named Bron, and Bron means raven, but he's also called Bendigeidfran, which basically means like blessed Bron, the good god Bron. And Bron did a stint in the Mabinogi in one of the stories. He's a shoemaker. And I was like, well, obviously, that's who we need to turn to. So I built everything from that period of Welsh mythology in the Mabinogi. Um, and we had a great time with it. And that's how I met Master Andrixos from Callantir, who had also lived in Rhodes for a while. And just a bunch of people who I hadn't previously met. And then people kind of started to come knocking because they had seen, oh, that was weird. Where did that come from? What's that based on? And then
And really, they were going, "Oh my God, that was so awesome! I want some of
awesome,
that."
but also different. And not every kingdom has the same level of leeway with how elevations work. And we did for that elevation, the women in white escorted Kalea to the field because they did the elevation on the field. We had her the
Wow.
night before in the long hall, and she was not sequestered because that's a late medieval thing. That is not an Iron Age Welsh thing. And the women in white escorted her to the field. And when we were getting ready to go, someone pointed out that a number of the armed women didn't have awards of arms. And I said, it doesn't matter. It's okay. We promise no one is going to stab anybody to death. It's going to be fine. Um,
How did
but
someone even notice that?
because someone, people understand the rules and they don't want to break the rules, and that's fine. I'm not angry about that. Like the person
Right.
pointed that out was trying to make sure there was not a scene, and instead the scene was this huge band of armed women. We were standing like 30 feet back from the crown, so there would be no question as to whether or not we were about to attack. Until, of course, I approached the crown with a spear because had to. But and that really started me down this wacky path where I end up writing elevations or coronations and a lot of scroll texts and that kind of stuff, which for me is fun because I can do things that wouldn't necessarily work as a performance piece, but will really let a person know how I hold them in esteem. That, I have so much respect for them that I'm willing to, here, I made you this
Yeah,
with poetry.
that's super cool.
Yeah, that
Um,
is that is the best thing the SCA does. The regular public declaration of adoration for each other is awesome.
it really is.
It's awesome.
It really is. And you, you just don't get that in regular life.
Uh-uh.
And when, as an SCA person, when you carry that into regular life,
Oh,
it's fun.
it is. Yeah.
Alanon says, as a warrior, having your tribe invest you with their spirit is empowering to then rush off to battle with that feeling of love.
Yeah. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
And he's tall enough that he can see over everybody. Being in the middle when you're short is tough. He's tall.
He's tall. He can see.
I could have used an apple box a couple of those times.
That's awesome.
I hope everyone who doesn't know me has now decided I'm like 3 feet tall. That would be perfect.
How tall are you?
I'm like 5'3.5".
Okay.
I'm short, but I'm not, you know. Alanon's just really, really tall.
Yeah.
And there's, it's funny. So there's a group called the Bastronai who are essentially the Tennessee contingent of Brashani fighters, and many of them are over 6.5 feet tall. And I don't know what's in the water in Tennessee, but I would like to know. And I'm wondering if it still works in your 40s, because like just a couple inches would save me a lot of hemming, and I would appreciate that.
My son is 6'5", and my daughter is currently 5'3", and she keeps asking when she's going to be as tall as him, and I'm like, oh, honey,
Testosterone's a hell of a drug.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. My older brother is almost a foot taller than I am, and I'm like, well, why'd you have to hog it all?
My sister might say that to me every once in a while too. She's about 5'4", and I'm 5'10", so that's a pretty big difference. It's funny. Well, so you literally got Laurel like right before, well, a year before everything went south.
Yeah, that Gulf Wars. And I was, of course, planning like a big, woohoo, let's have a party where we don't have to do anything crazy. And then COVID hit. Because I got the Laurel that Gulf Wars. And the way I found out about that was the most evil thing that any group of people have ever done to me, but whatever. And then that following Pensic was when my partner was knighted. So Gulf Wars is absolutely my favorite event, and we had a blast, but also it was really, really a lot of work for that Gulf Wars to happen, because Laird and I brought a lot of other people's stuff so they could come as well, which was fantastic to have them at Gulf Wars with us, but it was, it's stressful when you do an elevation.
Yeah.
Especially at a war. And then we did it again at Pensic. And then, we had like a half season of events, and we were getting ready to go to like a relaxed Gulf Wars to be followed by a relaxed Pensic with lots of fun weekend events in between. And that obviously didn't happen.
Has not happened.
Yeah.
So, and your order has been meeting online.
Yes.
How has that been for you? Has that been a weird introduction?
There was a long break there. So we had a polling early in 2020 when nobody knew that COVID was going to happen. We tend to have them early enough before kingdom events or wars that if the crowns want to give out awards at events where the attendance levels are likely to be high, they can do them.
How does the polling work?
So we have an electronic system called the ESP, the electronic system for polling. We've been lucky enough to have a few really, really great webmasters in a row in Atlantia, and they've done huge amounts of work to make everything go. So we have watch lists where you can, basically, if you go to our award system and you submit an award recommendation for a person, and that is for any of our polling orders, and all of our grants are polling orders, and all of our peerages, obviously, then it will automatically get delivered to the email list of whatever polling order they were submitted to. And that will also put that commentary on a watch list. And then we go in and add photographs, for the artists at least, for our Pearl, which is our grants level arts award, and for the Laurel, we go in and add photographs of people who've been nominated and their work as well. I don't know if that probably doesn't happen for anything other than the arts awards. And then we actually have a relatively new function where you can just click a button that says add support to candidate. So we used to do a lot of straw pollings, and people hated those because you would do a straw polling and then a week or two later you'd have to do a polling, and you're like, what? we just did this. Why didn't that count? Why doesn't that carry over? Now you can basically just click this thing, and until the person either gets the award or falls off the watch list because they've quit playing, the crown or the order principal or whoever, it's really only the crown and the order principal and probably the kingdom seneschal who could see whose support has been added to specifically by which members of the order.
Right.
And then that gives them a sense that it's time for us to poll this individual. And we also have part of our award system is a friends and family little thing where you can write in and say, hey, if you're considering giving awards to my apprentice or to my partner, these are the events they're planning to go to. So that they don't, go to the trouble of having scrolls made. And Atlantia's scroll game is amazing. You don't want to put the wrong event and date on a scroll, obviously. So the Crown wants to know that so they can get that information to the clerk signet and to whatever scribe is going to work on a scroll for an award. And it's great because you can just click that, I support this candidate. A number of our crowns have made it very clear that they don't want unexplained no's in a lot of pollings, which I think makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
I tend to, I'm one of those people who pretends to be really tough, but when it comes down to it, everybody wants me to be their judge in an ANS competition because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is beautiful. I don't know anything about Armenia. Come talk to me about Armenia if you ever have any time. Like, I'm that guy, which not everybody in the order is, and that's fine. But it worked. It seems to work pretty well. I have not been on the other side of it. I've never reigned, and I haven't been our kingdom web minister, so there might be problems with it that I'm unaware of, but as a member of the polling order, I think it works very smoothly.
Yeah, that sounds really awesome. We have had a lot of reluctance to do that type of thing online for years. And one of the really cool things that's coming out of this pandemic is that that's kind of gone by the wayside. And I think that something like your polling system, which I have written down the name of,
yeah, it works really well. And I haven't looked at the back end of it, but from the front end, I think it's very functional.
Yeah, I might have to do some research because I think that's really cool. That's a really great system, and I think that we could benefit from it. So,
and I've really been amazed. I've talked to a number of my friends about this. Nobody could have known the COVID was going to get as bad as it did and last as long as it did. Well, I'm sure somebody knew, but most of us are not epidemiologists. Not just in Atlantia, around the SCA, so many people have stepped up to really do the hard work of making the ESCA possible. The people who are hosting, like, our university is huge. We had, I think someone was saying the other day, we had 800 students at uni the last time. It's gigantic. And people are coming from outside of Atlantia. Some people are staying up all night to go to classes in other kingdoms that are far away. The number of people who have worked incredibly hard to make things keep functioning, it's just astounding. And I'm just so proud that people have seen this weird little hobby of ours is worthwhile enough to do that work to keep it going.
yeah, for sure. For sure. The classes have just been amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it stuff that and you can teach to somebody who's in Australia. I mean, it's such a cool thing. It's just opened things up so much, and I'm not sure why we didn't do that stuff before.
It didn't occur to us. We were too busy going to too many events. Like, I know not everybody has this schedule, but for a while, Aaron and I were going to 3 events a month. And obviously, like, we don't have any kids, so we're not neglecting anybody. But well, our dog would say that we're neglecting him. We're monsters. But we were spending so much time doing laundry and cleaning tents and getting them ready to take them again, that it would have been hard to do a lot of this stuff otherwise. And there are certainly things that we can't pretend it's the same.
No.
We complain about online Bardics, and I go to online Bardics. Those two things are fused together forever. I would dearly love to just be around a fire and have that actual, I don't know if you've tried to hear Bardics online, but people can't sing together.
No.
Because of the lags. There are people who are really, really smart about figuring out have figured out how to do it a little bit, but you can't do it the same way you would in person. And that communal activity of singing is really important to a lot of us, and that is not working right now. And particularly with pretty clear evidence that singing can be a super spreading event. Even when we can go back to events in person, I don't know when we can sing together.
Yeah. And singing while masked is not really a thing.
You can do it. I'll figure out the minute I find out that we really can actually have an event, because we've had a couple of false starts. The minute where it looks like it can really, really happen, I don't know if I'm going to make like a Pope bubble or something. I'm loud enough to get across a barrier, and I'm a crazy shut-in, so the risk of me actually having COVID is incredibly low because I never go anywhere. But
same.
Yeah.
Same. We had a little like 300 days in the house celebration a couple of weeks ago.
Oh my God.
Which is really crazy.
Yeah, so my friend Richard has a boat called the Feardraka, and if you go to Lily's, that is the boat. That is the Viking ship that you can sail. And I had always wanted to go. I knew that boat as a child when it was at the Longship Company here in Maryland, and then it got taken away, or it went away. I didn't really know. And then a friend of mine mentioned to me, "Oh yeah, it's the funniest thing. I bought this boat that's from where you're from." And I was like, "What? What did you buy?" So it took forever for me to get to go to Lily's, but I finally got to go and sail on the Feardraka in, I don't even know what is it anymore. I think 2017 was when I went and did that, and it was amazing. And it really gave me the hunger to row. And thankfully, right before COVID hit, I'd been saving up and I bought a rowing machine. And it has kept me sane. The number of times that I've rowed rather than tearing my hair out is no joke.
I also have a rowing machine that also serves that purpose.
Yeah, that's helping me be less insane, I think. I hope. And you know, there were huge shortages on them. Like the weird shortages have been very strange. For a while, no one could get any exercise equipment if they wanted it. So I was glad I bought it in time.
Yeah, we had to wait, I think, a couple months for ours, but we have it now. Yay! I used to swim. A mile several times a week, and I just don't think it's safe. I mean, you can't wear a mask swimming, and you know, you drink in all the water, and it's people juice, and it's just, swimming's not happening for a long time.
I'm guessing you don't have the kind of climate where outdoor swimming is an option very many months of the year.
During the summer, it is. We have a lake and a river nearby, and we kayak, so that's good. But honestly, we haven't even done the outdoorsy stuff that we usually do because it's been so crowded.
Yeah.
And you're out on the lake and it's fine, but loading in and loading out, and we have a lot of right-wing crazies that like think that it's really fun to like approach people in masks without their masks and get really aggressive with you, and it's like, no, I'm not dealing with it.
Yeah, that's hard.
So anyway, we're getting into politics. Sorry.
I mean, in this sort of situation, for most of us, we've never experienced anything like this pandemic.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Super crazy times.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you want to talk about?
I don't know. I'm sure there's 1,000 things because I've done this since Rocks were soft, but I also don't know how you could ever touch on all of it.
Right. Tell me about the bog mummies thing you've been working on.
Oh, sure. So, obviously, I'm really into poetry, and when I was in college, I had a great class called Anglo-Irish Literature, and that's where I first read the Toyn Boc Llúine, which is this great piece of Irish mythology, which I've since translated. And the translation I read was written by a man named Thomas Kinsella, who's an Irish poet who's just amazingly good. And on reading Thomas Kinsella, his modern poetry, I thought there's got to be more of this. I have to find it. And I went to my professor, Dr. Norsted. I went to Dr. Johan Norsted, and how did you end up teaching Irish? And I said, who else should I read? I like this modern Irish poet, Thomas Kinselet. Tell me someone else to read. Um, because I was largely reading protest poetry from the 60s. And he said, you should read Seamus Heaney. And I said, I'm on it. And I went and bought a copy of a book of his called North, where he wrote about bog bodies. And it had come to his attention because he was a Catholic living in Northern Ireland and having a very difficult time in the educational system, which used to be very, very biased against Catholics. And the Danish archaeologist P.V. Glob had put out a book on bog bodies because there were a bunch of finds in the 50s that were still are very important. And Seamus Heaney read that, and it sounded familiar to him. It sounded like it had connections to the violence his community was experiencing, all communities were experiencing in Northern Ireland at the time. And he started writing these poems in the, I guess, late 60s, early 70s. I could have those dates wrong. And I fell in love with what he was writing. And also I knew Iron Age bog bodies have to have archaeological information I need as a reenactor. So I got a copy of P.V. Glob's book and read it cover to cover and went back to Dr. Norstead and said, what else can you give me? And he's like, what do you, kid, there's not a lot on these. I don't know what you want. So
A lot of me.
Right? I just dug and dug and dug. And I'm sure you've seen this with researching steppe cultures. There are waves of research that come out. And so that was in the mid 90s that I had that sort of introduction to the material. And then I went to graduate school. And while I was in grad school, I gave a paper on Heaney's work on the bog bodies. And not because of me. And then Seamus Heaney won a Nobel Prize. Didn't have anything to do with me. Though I would have voted him. If they had called and asked me, I would have voted for him. And that led to another kind of uptick in research being available about bog bodies. And some of the bog bodies are incredibly important to reenactors. Some of them less so. Like the Tolland man has a really great hat and a belt and a noose. That's it.
Yeah.
I'm going to make that hat. I'm not going to make that noose. So, other than the hat, there's not a lot to use there. But there are a number of finds that are really, really great from a textile point of view, like Haldremos. That's a bog body find. So I just started reading and reading and reading and reading and reading and reading. And I buy every book I could find on it. And I had so exhausted all of my friends by talking to them about bog bodies, it had never occurred to me to teach a class about it at uni until a friend of mine who is not in Prashant, who is one of the people who helps run university, put out a call and said, I know this is weird, but we do tracks of classes. I want to do a track on death for uni. And I was like, he said, if you want a bog body class, I could throw together a bog body class. And she was like, yes, do a class on bog bodies. And I thought, yeah, sure, I'll get to it. And it had been a while since I'd looked for books. And obviously this year is really weird. And my job has not slacked off. I have not gotten any breaks. And I haven't really gotten to take any vacation because there's nowhere to go. And I thought, I'll have plenty of time, I'll find some time. But then things were very exciting at work because of modern events. And I thought, I'll cancel. It's fine. I don't have to do it. I don't have to send in the prospectus. I don't have to register this class. And I made I'm not gonna comment to a friend who very kindly threatened my life if I didn't teach the class. So class on bog bodies and why they're important and what they mean and all that kind of stuff. So thankfully, there's been a lot of really interesting chemical analysis that's gone on in this century. So we know more about how much those people traveled before they were interred. There's been more forensic study into how they died. So some of them we know died before they were interred in the bog. Some of them might have been killed by being put in the bog. We know more about when they lived, what they ate, what time of year they were killed, all kinds of stuff. And those finds that have textiles associated with them, we know more about the textiles as well. So that's really helpful for people who want to do Iron Age clothing, which in Northern Europe can be really hard to research. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
And that's in February, is that right?
Yeah, so Atlantia University is February 13th. and it's open to everybody. Some of the classes do have caps on them for how many people can take them. You don't have to live in Atlantia to go to university, and you don't have to be a member of the SEA to go to university, but you do have to register. And I'm pretty sure the deadline for registration is February 10th. And that's just so we don't have random people coming into Zooms and doing things that are inappropriate in the Zooms. We want to know that we're only giving those links to people who actually intend to, take the class.
Be serious and not get naked on camera.
Yeah, we don't need that. Kids
No,
don't.
nobody wants that.
It's not appropriate.
And there's also, I think another friend of mine is teaching a Scythian tattoo class too at that same university.
Yeah, Olivier.
Yeah.
Yeah, he and I both have wacky Scythian tattoos, Pazric tattoos.
As do I.
I mean, all the cool kids have them, right? Because they're the best tattoos.
Bug Buddy, take the wheel.
Yeah, I was just joking with a friend of mine about how I love that, and also the pedant in me must point out that it's actually Ice Mummy take the wheel, because bog mummies, as far as we can tell, are not tattooed, or their tattoos didn't survive. Ice Mummy take the wheel. Well, and Rains, it should be Rains. They were horse people.
That's true. Okay, we're going to change that. So it's Ice Mummy take the reins.
I think so.
Yeah.
I want a whole new meme.
Here we go. It's going to be a thing now.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I feel like I could probably just hang out with you for hours and hours and chat forever. But we have been going for about an hour and a half, which is about normal. So if there's anything else, we should probably.
I don't think so.
Okay, good. I'm sure there's more that I could ask you about, but we'll save it for another time.
Sure.
Tomorrow, my sister and I are doing a sister's interview with a local Ontarian knight, Lachlan, who is a Lion of Ontario. And he's one of those guys that just kind of brings the party all the time, but he also has some really deep underlying community building connection superpowers. He's lots of fun. So that's tomorrow. And I'm not really sure who she's interviewing ducal interviews, but I'm doing a Sunday interview with Laurel from Drachenwald, Leonette, on Sunday. And yeah, that's as far as we're going to go for now.
I don't know how you all keep it straight. It's a lot of information gathering, and it's a lot of work.
If I wasn't doing this, I would have no idea what day of the week it was.
I have this feeling. I forget all the time.
And it's lots of fun. Well, seriously wonderful to talk to you. And
thanks. I had a great time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks everybody, as usual, for watching. This would not be happening without you. So thank you.
Stay safe, everyone.
Good night.